Hi there. We're live at the RSA conference in San Francisco. I'm Bradley Barth, Director of Community Content with the Cyber Risk Alliance. My guest today is Jeetu Patel. He is the Executive Vice President and General Manager of Security and Collaboration at Cisco. Jeetu, thanks for being here.
Bradley, thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing great. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about resilience and the role that having a secure cloud architecture or multi cloud architecture plays in resilience. So, I think the best place to start is let's actually get a little bit of a definition of resilience, because that's one of those words that you hear bandied about all the time.
It gets overused quite a bit, right?
Overused.
Yeah.
The definition is very nebulous. It's very open to interpretation. How do you define it? And why is cloud such an important have such an important role to play in resilience?
So if you think about what's happened over the course of the past couple of years, we have all kind of witnessed how companies need to be much more resilient with the externalities that are going on. So you have to be more business resilient, you have to be more operationally resilient, you have to be more supply chain resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And we think that it's equally important that we are security resilient as well, which means that if you do have a breach, how do you make sure that you can recover from that breach and respond to that as quickly as possible? It doesn't bring your company down.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty important, kind of dimension to keep in mind, because security is now a critical infrastructure component. And as you know, even in the course of the past few years, there's been a tremendous amount of, expansion of the threat vectors where people can go out and attack your entire supply chain can go down if there's a breach. There's your critical infrastructure, your power grid, your water system, your financial system, your healthcare system could go down. And so we believe that organizations have to be resilient from a security standpoint, just like they need to be from a business standpoint. And of course, cloud technologies are going to have a pretty profound effect on it, because more and more of your applications are moving to the cloud. People are working in more of a hybrid mixed mode kind of world, and they're going to be working from any device, whether it's managed or unmanaged, any application, whether it's sanctioned or unsanctioned. And organizations have to figure out a way that they can stay resilient in spite of all of this, as they have more and more threat vectors and threat actors getting more sophisticated.
You mentioned you had a lot of interesting points, and there's a lot of directions I can go. But I think the first thing I'd like to ask you to follow up is just the idea of that ecosystems are getting so complex for organizations, and so when there is a breach, as you said, or some kind of an incident, an exploit or whatever, even if it just seems like at first it's one device or one user, it's never that simple. Attacks don't happen in a vacuum, and so there's always a ripple effect, and it can go up and down the supply chain. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're having this discussion about resilience.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we used to be, when this industry started, I mean, it was largely around organizations protecting themselves around a perimeter. And now what you're starting to see is there's a tremendous amount of interconnectedness. There's a hyper level of interconnectedness among all of the different companies that are out there. So I'll give you an example. An auto manufacturer recently had to stop the production line because one of the component manufacturers had a potential breach. And the ripple effect is pretty profound when the weakest link in the supply chain can actually have the entirety of the supply chain go down, or a demand chain go down. And the way that we think about this is there's this kind of very interesting construct of a security poverty line. And what is a security poverty line? It's line below which organizations are not able to either financially or through resources or through influence protect themselves the way that the other organizations who have more resources to protect themselves. But the reality is if you happen to be in contact with another organization that's below the security poverty line, you're just as exposed. And that's a pretty important construct to keep in mind on how do you keep just not your organization, but your entire supply chain and your ecosystem, protected from bad actors.
Sure. I mean, is there anything philosophically or strategy-wise that organizations can do to make sure that they, and for that matter, their partners throughout their extended ecosystem, get over that poverty line?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we are talking about at this conference is, it's you can't be overly kind of self-centered on this entire kind of initiative where you have to think about the ecosystem as a whole, and the way in which you as an organization and you as a vendor community need to think about this is, look, in some ways, this is a hyper-competitive world. And if you think about the vendor landscape, all the vendors like us, we are very aggressively competing with one another. Competition is good because it creates more innovation. All those things are great. But the reality is the enemy is not the competitor. The enemy is the bad actor.
Mm-hmm.
And we ought to make sure that as we're thinking about this, that what are we doing to protect this society from bad actors so that you don't have critical infrastructure breakdown that's occurring. And we've seen a lot of these happen over the course of the past few years. And the implications are pretty profound. And so what can organizations do to not just protect themselves, but make sure that they think about the entirety of the demand chain and the supply chain and protect that entirety of companies and ensure that that data is being exchanged and shared, from a threat intelligence standpoint with the core ecosystem. It's going to be pretty important.
Let's stay on the track of talking a little bit about resilience, and we defined it a little bit, but also another question that I think a lot of organizations are always asking is how do you measure it? How do you benchmark it?
Yeah.
And that's something that can be up for debate. But what's your take on that?
The easiest measure of resilience is when you do have a breach, how quickly can you detect that something went wrong? How quickly can you respond to it? And how quickly can you take remediation actions for it? And so the way that the security industry is broken up is there's two major sets of problems that need to get solved. One of them is around prevention. What do you need to do to protect your organization from a breach actually occurring? Whether it be on any of the control points, whether it be the user, the device, the network, the application, how do you protect yourself? And the second area is if there is a breach that happens, because security is all about minimization of risk. It's not about going out and making sure that you eliminate risk completely. So when there is a breach that does occur, what can you do to make sure that you've got the right level of threat intelligence practices in place so that you can detect a breach fast enough, almost in real time? Make sure that you have the right level of machine learning so that the vulnerabilities can get managed and you can be proactive on managing those, and then respond and remediate as fast as possible.
And can you give also you had mentioned that there were some recent examples of what would be key lessons learned for the industry in terms of where we either saw exemplary examples of resilience, and in other cases where you can still get a sense that there's still some work left to be done. What stands out in your mind as some of the key examples from the past year or so?
Look, I think an example of where these things have kind of gone sideways is when your production line gets impacted for an unnatural amount of time, or your business continuity is impacted because of a breach in security. And those are happening on a daily basis across multitude of different industries. And the absence of that, when you can actually proactively know, like one of the great things that is starting to happen because of machine learning technology now is security is a data game. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is the more scale that you have and the more telemetry you have, you can better predict a breach before it actually happens, right? And a great example of this is vulnerability management. This is a fascinating statistic. Most organizations can only patch about 20% of the vulnerabilities that they themselves have identified. Only 20%, mm-hmm. which means that 80% of the vulnerabilities go unaddressed because they just don't have the resources and the time to go out and do it, because there's way too much signal to noise ratio mm-hmm. that's coming in as well. So what do you do about that? Well, identifying a risk-based model that tells you there's going to be a higher level of risk with a certain set of vulnerabilities. And so go patch those first before you patch the others, because there's actually real-time data on which exploits are actually, occurring right now. Those are actually meaningful advancements that you can make in this industry. And that's happening because there's the right level of data and the right level of machine learning models that you can actually create an inference of what's happening. Yeah. And so what you'll start to see is a tremendous amount of innovation made with artificial intelligence and machine learning, with the data and telemetry, especially as the web goes dark. As you have end-to-end encryption, you might not be able to look inside a packet that's traversing a network, but you'll actually look and create an inference saying, These are anomalous sets of behavior. And so what do we need to do to go out and protect that? And the same will happen on a device posture. How do you go out and manage your device posture in the right way?
You had also mentioned business continuity, which very much goes hand in hand with resilience.
Yep.
And we see how critical something like the concept of business continuity is, just even off of examples of some of the major ransomware attacks that have happened over the last couple of years. I would be curious to ask you, where do you find that organizations are most falling short in terms of business continuity? Is there a particular area where things really need to be shored up even more?
Yeah, so I think, firstly, if you look at the phishing and malware and ransomware attacks, they're growing in double and triple digit percentages, right? And what's happened is, at large, organizations are very, very resource constrained, not just from a capital perspective, but also from the quality of talent that you need as an organization to go out and protect against the breaches. While that's happening, the threat surface has expanded, and this quality of threat actors has gone from just hackers in basements to nation states, right? And so you've got this kind of dual effect: is you've got a huge shortage of skilled talent and labor, and you've got a huge amount of upsurge of the kind of people that you might have that are going out and doing the attacks, who are far more sophisticated than what they need to be. And if you don't have the right investments on both the prevention as well as the detection and response side of the house, you will fall short as an organization. And so the way that we think about this is, what do we need to do to ensure that organizations are well prepared and given the right level of data of what might actually end up happening, rather than just telling them after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And real time and the speed with which you can go out and respond and remediate a threat is actually just as important as detecting a threat in the first place.
As organizations are trying to develop a more secure cloud architecture for themselves, they're going to have to consider all the challenges that are associated with the expanding attack surface that you had just mentioned
Absolutely.
before. And that's, of course, you think about the just all of the factors that have complicated things over the last couple of years that are only getting more complicated, remote and hybrid workforces, distributed work environments, and a proliferation of all sorts of different devices that have to be accounted for, different devices, different endpoints. So do you have any recommendations in terms of, where do you even start to begin when you're trying to formulate, how am I going to create some kind of a secure multi-cloud architecture for myself that accounts for all of these complications?
Well, the way that we think about this is the future of work is definitively going to be hybrid. People are going to work in mixed mode. Sometimes they're going to work in the office. Sometimes they're going to work at home. Sometimes somewhere in the middle. And when they're working in these different areas, they're going to work from devices that are managed or unmanaged, applications that are sanctioned or unsanctioned, networks that are secure or insecure. And when that is happening, how can you make sure that you provide some easy mechanism for organizations so that the complexity is taken away, the friction is low, both on the management side as well as the end user using it, while still protecting them and the efficacy being high, right? And so this is a huge area of investment for us. In fact, one of the things that we're announcing right now is this initiative that we've been working on for many years, called the Security Cloud. And basically, it's a combination of connectivity technology, security capabilities, as well as the threat intelligence side of the house. And how can you have those services be brought together so that regardless of who an organization is and whether they want to go out and connect to a private application, a public application, or directly to the internet, we can make sure that as long as they're connecting through the security cloud, they're safe and secure. And so that's an area that we've actually spent a fair amount of time in. And in fact, what we see happening right now is majority of these kind of major investments that you see happening in the future will be around this notion of, can you provide the right level of threat intelligence? Can you provide the right level of prevention and do it in the cloud? Because this notion of a perimeter is going away. There is no such thing as just protecting your organization with a perimeter. You now have the perimeter is the cloud, and you need to make sure that you can actually protect your data and your applications and your devices all in the cloud. And you can't just do one of those pieces. You have to make sure that you're doing the entirety of it all. So the user, device, network, and applications, all four have to get secured.
Well, great. Well, with that, it looks like we've just about run out of time. So I want to once again thank my guest, Jeetu Patel from Cisco, for joining us today and having a very great and interesting conversation on resilience in the cloud with me. Thank you so
Hey, thank you for
much.
having me.
Just a reminder also to check out the landing page at securityweekly.com/Cisco. You can find more information there. With that, this is Bradley Barth from the Cyber Risk Alliance, and we will see you a little bit later. Keep watching.
Welcome back to RSA Conference 2022. It's day 2, and we're still recording live at the Marriott Marquis. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this segment is Sonali Shah. She is the Chief Product Officer at Invicti Security. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We love Invicti. You guys have been such a great partner of ours over the years, and you just hired a great CMO sitting in the back of the room.
Oh,
So,
Alex is the best. We're lucky to have
he
him.
is. We're going to talk about cultural blind spots
Yeah.
and DevSecOps. Let's start with the challenges of the DevSecOps teams today. When you think about the last 2+ years, what's going on with the developers? They've been under a lot of pressure to take businesses and completely transform them from where they were to like accelerating digital transformation overnight. And that's had to create a lot of stress for these teams. What are you seeing with your customers and in these development teams? What's going on?
Yes. So, we recently did a survey of a couple hundred, both developers as well as security professionals, to understand what the past couple of years has done to them. What has been the impact of COVID? And really, the stress levels have increased. And there's kind of two things happening. One is on the development side, as you said, digital transformation. Web applications are the way our customers communicate with their partners, their employees, their own customers, right? So there's this incredible stress put on developers because they need to constantly be releasing new code and enhancing the applications they have, right? So that's one piece of it. But then on the other side, we're seeing an increase in the number of cyber attacks. In fact, year over year, just the number of vulnerabilities found only goes up. It never goes down, right?
Yeah.
And now you've got this added dimension where you've got not just the normal kind of ransomware, cyber criminal types, you've got the political ones too, right? So a lot of companies that decided not to do business in certain parts of the world were attacked, right? So you've got this combination of increased desire to innovate and rapidly release new software, but then also this incredibly rapidly growing threat landscape. And that is what causes a lot of tension, both for dev and sec.
Right, exactly. And the concept of DevSecOps has been around for a while. We were talking DevSecOps and shift left before the pandemic. So this is not a new concept. The question is, how do you solve it in a very remote world now? Like, you can't this is the first time we've been face to face in over 2 years. A lot of us, the last time we were together was at this event in March of 20, right before everything shut down. And as developers and as engineering teams and people who are used to being in offices and working closely together, going remote also created a whole new set of challenges for development teams. How do they collaborate? How do they make sure that the code that they're writing also is going through the security checks? Like, how has this shift also impacted this as well?
Absolutely. We have over 3,000 customers and they're all at different stages in their DevSecOps journey. And the ones that I find are the most successful, there's really two pieces to it. There is the technology side as well as the cultural side. Right. So on the technology side, how do we make sure that developers are thinking about security throughout their kind of day-to-day jobs? And it's not an afterthought, right? There's this concept of security debt and the security poverty line, right?
Yeah.
And in order to avoid building up further security debt, the only way to do it is to automate it. Right. So you think about credit card payments today, right? Like, who waits till the bill comes and then pays it? It's just auto pay. It's automated.
Right.
And that's where we see, customers that are most successful in doing DevSecOps have it automated, and it's automated within the developer's existing tool chain.
Right.
right? Whether they're using Jira or Jenkins or Slack, it's got to be automated into it.
Yeah.
And then there's also, I feel like, been a bit of an overemphasis on the shift left. Because yes, you want to shift left, you want to get vulnerabilities where it's easiest, fastest, cheapest to fix. But let's face it, things are going to be released in production.
Right.
And the threat landscape is always changing. So what was secure today may not be secure tomorrow.
Right.
So security needs to be automated, but you need to shift it left and shift right. So continuously be scanning even when things are live.
Yeah, I think the challenge in this space is there is a set of static checks along the CI/CD pipeline, right? During the continuous integration deployment pipeline, there are integration points of technology that work within the existing tool set that manages the static side of the application, right? But to your point, once that application's been deployed in production, I still have to monitor it in the runtime world, in the dynamic world, as it's running. And I think the challenge in the industry has been, how do you balance both of those? How do you shift static checks left and making sure that the tooling is embedded within the developer tool sets, but also still monitoring it and looking for the variations and then creating the feedback loops.
Right.
It's it's learning from the runtime to influence the static and vice versa, so that they complement each other. You could be doing great on the runtime side, but if you're not doing this, or great on the static side and not doing this, it's really bringing those two capabilities together.
Yeah. And I would say automation there again is really important. So if you one of the things you need to do is first understand your risk profile, right? So what are all the things you've got out there in development as well as in production? And then you've got, just as important it is to automate in development, you've got to automate in production so that your high critical, your critical applications you're scanning nightly or weekly, or maybe some you're scanning monthly, but that then those results, first of all, the scans have to be kicked off automatically.
Right.
Then the results automatically have to flow into whatever ticketing system.
Into a remediation workflow of some sort, right?
So just automation is key, both in shifting left and shifting right, and sort of bringing it all together so that the developers can stay in their existing workflow, get the information they need on what to fix, when to fix it within their workflow, and then have the support they need. So I mentioned that there's a technology piece and a culture piece.
Right.
And so making sure that developers have, that there's security champions on the development teams that they can go to for help, making sure that your developers have, secure code training. And that the other thing is that it's not just giving it to them, but making sure that security is made something that's visible across the company, right? And so that's top down.
Yeah.
That mandate that, yes, it's just as important to innovate on our applications, but also to keep it secure.
Right.
And if you have that culture throughout the industry with, the automation piece of it, that's really what I think works for a lot of our customers.
So let's talk about that cultural piece for a second, because when I think about where we've been, security on one side, developers on the other side, security is always late to the party, always wanting to slow down the developers and deploying into code. So as you think about security champions programs, is it security inserting folks into the development side? Is it development side, kind of working? How do these security champion programs succeed well? Where does it start? Does it start on the development side? Does it start on the security side? Like, how would you build one of these programs? Because I think it's very important to remove the friction between those two teams that have traditionally been there. But who initiates it, and how do you structure the program to work well? Because I think that's still a challenge for a lot of organizations.
It absolutely is. It has to be developer led, right? So supported by security, but it's got to be development teams taking the lead. So I was recently speaking with a customer of ours, a global bank based in Paris, and the gentleman was saying, they started this security champions program, and he didn't expect many developers to volunteer to be champions. And he was surprised at how many people he got, because he's like, look, they take pride in their work, and security is just as important as quality. And these people actually, this is an opportunity for them to learn more about security and then share best practices with their colleagues. And by the way, anything security related on your resume or LinkedIn profile is just an added benefit, for developers. So from his, I thought that was just a really good way to think about it, is when you've got, it's developer led, they themselves are taking ownership of what they produce, and then you've got security supporting. That's, I think, what makes for the most successful programs.
So then what does security do to support those champions that have volunteered? Is it training? What is it that they actually need from the security teams to be successful? How does that engagement, that relationship start? What does security give back then to the development teams?
No, it is absolutely training. And I think that, a lot of the tools, like I know with our tool at Invicti, we're putting remediation advice in the, say, Jira ticket, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. So that the developer has the information they need to fix it. But there's always going to be cases where it's difficult or something's not clear, right? And then they have to go back. But if developers can go first, hopefully they've got a tool that's, first of all, accurate and actionable.
Right.
That's an assumption
that's
I'm making
half
that
the
you've
battle.
had. Right. And if you've got, accurate and actionable results, then I think that, developer can often fix things on their own. Mm-hmm. If not, they go to their security champion, the person on their team that is the security expert. And if they're not able to help, you still have security there helping out.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and this, the talent shortage in cybersecurity, right? It's never going to scale if every single question has to go to the security person.
Exactly. And I think this has been the big challenge in vulnerability management for a long time, even excluding application vulnerabilities for a second, right? Yes, we had the data. Then we would take that data and we send it over to the IT team, in this case, the development team, right? The developer team said, okay, fix all your vulnerabilities. But if they don't know what to fix or how to fix it, it's not going to get fixed. So then that list just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which doesn't help either. So to your point, remediation, guidance, but do we see the opportunity to automate some of these fixes in the future? I'm a big fan of automation because we do have a lack of skills and resources out there. Are there things that can be kind of automated on the remediation side? Are you starting to see organizations try to go down that path, or does it still need a developer to make the fixes in the code and before it can get back into production?
So, there's been a lot of buzz around this auto remediation, AI, ML type solutions. I'm hopeful. And I think there will be some things that we can auto remediate. I just haven't seen the adoption yet because it's still new, the technology, and it is scary to auto remediate and then break something.
Right.
Like say you're an e-commerce company and you fix something, which is great, but then now you've broken the link and people can't check out.
Right. Yeah, I remember this in the early days of intrusion prevention systems when we tried to do active blocking in the
IPS,
network. And the old IPS days. So, I mean, we still have some of that stigma, but hopefully simple things like updating a library and running it back through the QA testing cycle to remove a vulnerability in an open source component. We should be able to remediate those
That is
kind
where
of
I'm
things,
seeing
right?
some traction.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the open source side because that it's out of date.
Right.
You know which one you need to pull. The question is, though, if you pull the latest, is it going to break something?
Exactly right. So you still got to run it through the QA checks and the tests and make sure from a regression standpoint it's still working. But that would be, I think, a really easy use case to remediate around.
Yeah, that is where I'm seeing some progress, but still early days.
Early days. What's next for Invicti? You've done a great job of pulling together two great products with NetSparker and Acunetics. As Invicti continues to evolve, where does the product set go next?
Yeah. So we're the best in DAST, and we will always be the best in DAST. And DAST is, for your audience, if they don't know, dynamic application security testing. Yeah. What is so powerful about DAST is you can shift left and shift right with it.
Yeah.
You don't need the source code, right? And, we were talking about automation. Automation only works if you've got great accuracy and speed, right? So we're continuously investing in DAST. That'll always be part of our roadmap. especially like around API security now,
Right.
with the latest
Yep.
frameworks, you
Mhm.
constantly have to update that.
Yeah.
So that's key. We have recently launched SCA and IAST. We've got support for a couple of languages. Definitely building that out.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
We've got discovery, which is mapping your attack surface.
Right.
And so one of the things we're looking at is, how do we help customers decide or prioritize what to scan and what to fix?
Right. So by understanding
Some of
the
that risk
assets,
scoring,
right,
yes.
and doing some of the risk assessment around those applications, how often should I scan them? Where are the priorities to fix
Yeah.
them based on their risk levels? Yeah.
Yeah. So these are all areas, because the number one thing I hear from customers, well, I should say two things. One is they don't like working with all these separate tools. They want to see things together, right?
Yes.
Which is hence our investment also in open source security, because that's also very important, right?
Mhm.
So the SCA, the ISPs, but also, as you scan more applications and you scan more frequently, you're going to find more. And how do you know what to prioritize?
Right.
So that is something really that we are working on, because there's a lot of information we can gather externally.
Yep.
And then with some information also from customers, we can then come up with scoring and saying, all right, these are the top 10 things you should do first.
Great solution, because that's where you can really bridge the gaps between security and development.
Right.
Prioritize it. for 'em.
Prioritize it.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Sonali, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.
Yes. If anybody wants to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Invicti RSA. And with that, we're going to take a quick break, but stay tuned. We have more interviews coming up.